All of the interviews I did for Morphenomenal were crazy memorable, to say the least, but I will never, ever, ever forget the day that I interviewed Chip Lynn. And maybe not for the reasons you might think. So if you don't know who Chip Lynn is, he's just one of the most influential people who's ever worked on Power Rangers. Arguably the most influential, depending on how you might gauge something like that. He was a unit production manager on the first season. He started writing for the show by the end of the second season, and then he continued writing for Power Rangers all the way through Time Force, which personally is my favorite season. It's a fan favorite season. It's a milestone moment for the show because it was the last season that was produced under Saban Entertainment, the original owners of the show, and then from there he ends up coming back for and works under Disney. Um, when production got a little iffy a couple times, I guess is a short way to put it. And then by the 2010s, Lynn came back and was a full-time executive producer for the first time on the show for Dino Charge, Ninja Steel, and Beast Morphers. So he's really had a profound impact, certainly over almost every iteration of the show that has existed. So he's there's a good case to be made that Chip Lynn is the most influential person who's ever worked on Power Rangers. Now, as for our conversation, Chip was incredibly gracious with his time. Like so many people, he gave me multiple hours. We talked over the phone. It was really, really fun to poke his brain and ask questions and have that time with somebody who obviously had a huge impact on my childhood and into my adulthood. But I don't remember it because of the conversation, as good as it was. I remember it because my wife went into labor with our son a couple hours later. Our son, Jason, was born about exactly 12 hours after that phone call started. It was obviously life changing. Becoming a dad is something I've always wanted to do. Going through that whole experience was something incredible. And the whole time I'm talking to Chip Lynn, I'm sitting there worried, like, can we hold off? Can we make it a few more hours? Um, and we did. So thank you, Jason. So I bring all that up to share with you just a little bit of the background, insight into what it's like to write a book sometimes. This is my first book. I've never written a book before. I am a longtime journalist, so I know a lot about navigating research, talking to a lot of people, doing interviews, but I'd never done something like this, and I'd certainly never done anything like this while my wife was pregnant. That was something brand new to learn along the way. So we're baking Jason, and we're also baking this baby in the form of a book at the same time. So it's just an unreal experience. And there's so many people that I talked to, so many people who gave me so many hours of their time that aren't quoted one time in the book. And on one hand, that sucks because when I give someone my time, you don't expect anything, but you kind of anticipate that you might be included in something like this. But for the most part, that just can't be done with something like this. I'm telling the story of Power Rangers. It's not about any one person. It's not about any one thing involving Power Rangers. It really is like a deep, depth and breadth of the franchise in terms of highlighting the show, merchandise, controversies, anything else you can think of that kind of surrounds something as huge as Power Rangers that has had an impact on so many millions of lives. Obviously, Chip Lynn is quoted in the book. He is an incredibly important figure, as I've already said. But you know, we spoke for almost 3 hours. There's tons of stuff that he shared and stories and little nuggets of you know just little anecdotes about his history with people that didn't make it in because ultimately they don't serve the story. They can be great to share on a platform like YouTube, TikTok, whatever it might be. And I hope that you find some enjoyment out of them. Obviously, it's a great way to promote the book as well. But really, I think it's just cool stuff like that I'd like to share with you guys in the lead up to the release of Morphenomenal, How the Power Rangers Conquer the World. Here you go.
Yeah, so you mentioned the pilot there. One of the things I mentioned in one of the emails is just how you kind of found your way to Saban Entertainment. I think you were friends with Jonathan from based on some really old interviews I've read from 2001, something Elf Funneroverse. I don't know if you even remember that interview or are familiar with that.
I don't remember that. But so I knew Jonathan. He and I met because I built a camera crane when I went to film school. He saw it on the road. He left me a note saying, "Hey, would you build me a camera crane?" And I told him, "No, I won't build you a camera crane, but I'll work with you." And so we worked with him. He and I did a couple of pretty crappy films, low budget junk, and then he was offered the opportunity to do this pilot, which was, not going to be very long. I don't know. The original pilot was maybe 7 or 10 minutes, something like that. And so we did that. We did the pilot. That was for Heim. And, we all kind of, the script was kind of goofy and weird. Who knew if it was going to go anywhere? And after we watched what we had shot, the pilot, I remember we all looked at it and thought, "Oh my God, get your resumes together. This is going nowhere." But there were a couple of people who thought it was really awesome, Mark Richardson being one and Haim Saban being another. And sure enough, he was able to sell it, and we got an order. We made a bunch of episodes. And I when I watched them, I had a hard time following them, honestly, but not Haim Saban. He knew, he had watched how it had been done in Japan, and he knew how he wanted to adapt it. And he's a very astute guy. And he just decided he was going to stick with it. And actually, this was his second attempt. I think it was his second attempt. He had tried once before. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and I know, I don't know if you have any. I don't think you have any obviously connection to that, but I guess Jonathan was around for that first attempt. No,
I don't think he had anything to do with the first one. We both were brought in. We just met Haim for the first time through a guy named Ronnie Hadar. Ronnie Hadar might be a good contact for you. But anyway, Ronnie Hadar brought in Jonathan. We did this little pilot. It got picked up for a season. We thought it might be, might go, it was a season, I think the first season was maybe 40 episodes. And I believe that even Haim Saban himself, after the first season was, he knew it was going to be successful, but I think he never could have dreamed the wild success that it enjoyed. And the fact that it went on so long was shocking to everybody. But there were very few people who could look at the first episodes and say, "Oh, this is exactly what we wanted. This is really going to go somewhere." But Haim Saban and a few crew members, namely Mark Richardson, who's always a bit tilted in the head in a wonderful way, he recognized right away, man, this is going to be awesome. And sure enough, now the rest was history.
Well, I know you started out as a unit pro manager. What were you doing though with the pilot and kind of that first year? What were a lot of the your average day? I assume there maybe wasn't an average day because I know that kind of probably entailed a lot of different things.
Well, one of the wonderful things about the show was that it was very, very low budget. Most people look at that as a negative, but in retrospect, it was a huge advantage for all of us who didn't have much experience in the industry because it meant that we could put our hands on anything because there were no unions. If the camera department needed help, we'd help the camera department. If the wardrobe department needed help, we grab boxes and carry them to the truck. Nobody had the "this is my department, don't touch it" attitude. And so for instance, in the morning, I remember I would, there were mornings where I would drive the camera truck to the set and park it, and then I would catch a ride back to the office and do some work, and then catch a ride and come back and do something else, or help somebody line up a location. And I was a production manager, which technically meant I was supposed to be kind of hiring and firing the nuts and bolts crew members, and then finding equipment and whatever was needed for that particular block of episodes we were shooting, and make sure that everything was on time and paid for. But because it was such a low budget show, I have been several different Rangers. Most everybody on the crew who wasn't completely overweight ended up in a pair of spandex at one point or another. I was several monsters, and that was the wonderful thing. The colorful part about the show was that we all just jumped in to do whatever it would take, and we all understood when you took the job, that was what it was going to be, and it was Yeah, it was awesome. And so the crew was small, tight. They were hardworking. They were fantastic people, and we all became rather close friends because it's a real battle to make the end of to get the last shot before the sun went down was a battle. And so, you would take whatever help you could because we were all in the trenches together. It was fantastic.
Were there occasions, I've never come across this yet, but where that getting that last shot kind of it was right at the wire, or times anything you remember specifically, it's something that just had to go over long, or?
Oh, there were often times when we had to go over long. And in your contract you get paid extra for going over long, and people understood that was going to happen now and then. It's interesting because when we shoot in New Zealand, you cannot extend the day, go long, without explicit permission from the crew. So if the director says, hey, I want an extra 15 minutes to get this shot, the crew gets to kind of vote whether or not they'll do it. And I remember there was one time when there was a director who wasn't very efficient with his time, and the crew recognized that. And when he asked for extra time, they said no. They said, we'd rather be at home with our families than, spend more time having you spin your wheels on the set. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me because I came from the U.S. where you always, if you could pay for it, you would just keep working. But in New Zealand, that wasn't the case. And so one time, not always, and oftentimes we went over even in New Zealand, and the crew voted, of course, we'll help out if we can. But I remember there was one time where they had just had enough, and they just decided, nope, we have priorities, and this isn't one of them right at the moment. So we adjourned.
So the next day, do people bring that into the work the next day, or do they kind of just keep reset and do what they do?
No, I think they bring it in because it was a bit shocking. I was contacted immediately to say that we're not going to finish today, and of course my first reaction was, oh, well, just go over. It's okay. We'll accommodate. And the answer was, nope, the crew won't go over. And that was so it was a big moment, and that was a crew's prerogative, and the director knew that was a possibility. And so he asked for extra time, and they said no, it didn't work out. So yeah, I think it did come to the set, came to my attention, and we had to make amends for it. We had to make some adjustments and make sure the crew knew that we were on their side and it wasn't going to happen again. And that was the result that they were hoping for when they said no, and it was exactly the result that they should have gotten, and they did get.